Hi, my name is Brian York, and I'm responding to the request to answer questions regarding the senior project manager opportunity. The first question is basically tell you about a time that I had to manage a project that required collaboration between multiple departments. An example of that would be the mobile credentials project for the university that started in the fall of 2022 and actually went through the fall of 2023. And it was a very large project team and stakeholder with multiple stakeholders from across departments across the university. The core team, I would basically conduct core team meetings every Monday, and that was about 12 people. We would go through what had been completed, kind of what would we be completed, what had been completed since the last week, what would we be completed this week, and are there any specific issues or any new risks that we identified. We would go through those again on Monday. And then on Wednesdays, we would have the full team status meeting, which was about 25 people, 20 to 25 people, and review where we were at in the progress that we were made against what we had said we were going to do. One of the specific challenges that we had to face during that project was installing new time clocks for the student employees that for the dining employees, and required a lot of brainstorming and thought processes that we had to go through and involve a lot of different people. We looked at, we had to engage the dining hall resources, the Purdue IT department, as well as the residence hall dining staff, along with our vendor that was working with us at the time. And we had to make several trips to the campus dining halls and look at the actual time clocks and how the students would interact with them, and then how we would get those to communicate with an iPad, and that would be able to then track their time into using the new mobile credentials via their phones and trying to figure out how that would all work. However, we were very successful and able to release the mobile credentials for the incoming class in the fall of 2023 to about 9,000 students, faculty, and staff at that point in time. The second question is, describe a situation where you encountered unexpected changes or shifting priorities due to a project. One of the perfect examples of that was when we were in the final stages of implementing a new event management system for the conferences department of the university with the start of the COVID shutdowns. If you recall, we weren't really sure how that was all going to work out. We were told to separate, not be, in meetings and close proximities and whatever. The issue was that we were literally finishing up the project. We were in the final user accepting stage. And so we had to find a way to continue meeting, but then also to spread apart. So we actually found some space in the union that would allow us to do that. We had to incorporate a lot of video virtual meetings technologies at that point in time, which were still kind of in their infant stages. One interesting thing, though, is the vendor was actually centered in Texas, and he still wanted to fly up and meet with us on a regular basis. But with the unknowns of the COVID at that point in time, we had to figure out, we basically said, no, you can't be flying in because we don't know what's happening. We don't want you catching things on the flight, bringing them to us. We just cannot. So again, that was a pivot for him because he was very much used to being on site. But we had to pivot and push everybody out to a virtual situation. But we were very successful. We was a very successful release of that, and we were literally finishing up when the university shut down. I have a picture of our leaving our first meeting where the signs were shutting the university down, do not come back on campus. Another interesting aspect, though, is that project was pretty much followed up by the COVID vaccine tracking project that I ran, which again was another high priority, high visibility, with the Dean of Pharmacy serving as our executive sponsor. And it was a huge push to get the students back on campus, if you recall. But we had to make sure that we were tracking in an efficient fashion those that had been vaccinated against COVID at that point in time. And so again, that was a large project team across multiple areas. That was completely virtual at that point in time. We knew what we were doing. We had been in it about 6 months to a year at that point in time. And so we started pushing that forward. So that was another example of a huge pivot that we had to make on the project. The third question was, give an example of a time you used data to generate a report that informed decision making. As a project manager, one of the most critical things is tracking the allocation of resources, particularly in the IT department, is the tracking of the time spent of resources as they were allocated to projects. Um, because when you're starting a project, you're developing the plan, you're developing a schedule, and you need to know how long is this project going to take. However, as you know, all resources at the university are working on multiple projects at a time, and so you're basically given a slice, a sliver of time from a resource. And so usually, depending on the skills and the complexity and what type of project it is, you're going to anywhere from 10 to 5 to 20% resource allocations on this. But you have to understand that am I using your time valuably? I mean, a resource manager must know how the resources are being used and are they being used accurately. So we would establish a charter. I would work with the individual team members, and I would like, how much time is it going to take you to complete this? I would get an estimate of their allocations. I think I can do this in, X amount of percent of my time, or, 4 hours a week, 10% of my time. That's put into the charter. And then I'm asking the resource managers to say, okay, Brian, you can have this resource for 4 hours a week, 10% of their time to complete this project. But then particularly for the IT resources, we're tracking their time against that project on a weekly basis to see how many hours is that resource spending on that project. Once the project is completed and we've successfully implemented or completed our project or what we were doing at that point in time, I then capture all of that information and see how that resource time was spent. Total hours, basically on a week, were they allocated, you start crunching the numbers and how close were you to that 10% or whatever they were allocated to that project. And then create a comparative report using the Excel numbers, the numbers that were being crunched from the time tracking system. Sit down with the resource managers and say, okay, this is how our time was spent, your time was spent on this project. How close were we to your initial estimates that we asked for? And then you start honing in on getting better on your estimates that you're doing against those, using true data that you've captured from their time. And then finally, the fourth question is, have you ever identified a need for improvement within a project or another area of responsibility? Yes, a perfect example of that was when I was very first hired as a manager for the university development technical team. And it was a team comprised of 8 resources within ITAP at that point in time. And they were directly supporting the university development office. But when I was hired, requests were coming in. They were flying in from university development, and they were just going into this pile of work, and everybody was kind of working on everything at the same time. People would grab things that made sense to them or they had some level of experience. But what was really troublesome was they were as a team managing production support as well. So if something broke in production, it was kind of an all hands-on aspect of, okay, who can fix this? And everybody kind of jumped on it. So the outcome of this is there was a huge backlog of work that the team had that 90% of it had been started, but nothing was getting completed because everybody was doing project work also with production support work, which made just no sense from an efficiency use of standpoint. So what I did and what I worked with the team is I said, okay, let's look at this. How about we take 2 resources and identify them for a quarter, 3 months of time being strictly on production support. If they don't have any ongoing production support at that time. They can help backfill some project work to get some low-flying fruit, some low-hanging fruit done on a project. However, production support is their primary activity during this 3-month period of time. And then once that quarter's over, they will rotate off onto a project, but then two other people would come back in from a production support standpoint. And so that became a very efficient way to manage our work. The production support was getting addressed in a very timely fashion. People were becoming more of an expert, if you will, more efficient at solving these production support times. Our project backlog was decreasing because we had resources specifically identified to a project, and the resources were being done, and the work was getting done in a much more efficient fashion. I believe that captures all of the information that I have. If you have any further questions, please reach out and let me know. Thank you very much for your time.